Good afternoon, welcome to BB's Lawn-Side Barbecue on a Sunday afternoon. You're about to hear some blues music. In Kansas City, blues history goes back a long ways. Kansas City has been rocking, jumping, and swinging the blues since the 1930s, and by golly, we're going to do it again this afternoon. So I hope you all are ready for that. So what I want you to do to bring the Tom Trashmouth Baker Band to the stage, I want you to stomp your feet, clap your hands, make some kind of noise, but let's bring them on. Tom Baker Blues Band.
Kansas City, the city of fountains, a cow town, known for jazz, steaks, friendly people, and our professional sports teams. We are in flyover country, a sprawling, diverse metro area of 2.4 million people in the heart of America, divided by a state line, rivers, and interstate highways. Kansas City is a crossroads for people, commerce, and culture. Kansas City has been a crossroads since its earliest days to the present. Lewis and Clark passed through along the Missouri River. It was an embarkation point for settlers moving west, a transportation hub for river, rail, road, and air. People continue to pass through from north, south, east, and west. This melting pot of influences created Kansas City's culture. Two notable aspects of Kansas City culture influenced by our being a crossroads are barbecue and the blues. They come together at Lindsay and Joe Shannon's joint, BB's Lawn-Side Barbecue.
I grew up eating barbecue from when I was a small kid. I witnessed the barbecue places that had been there forever, the Bryants and the Gates and the Harris's barbecue, and I felt that Kansas City was right for barbecue and blues music. So I thought that would be a working combination. When I lived in Philadelphia, that was a barbecue restaurant, and it was B's Lawn-Side Barbecue. And so B was a woman who came from Lawnside, New Jersey, and Lawnside, New Jersey grew up after the Second World War with a barbecue and jazz and blues community. So I just shortened it a little bit and it became BB's Lawn-Side Barbecue. Well, the one thing that you almost always read about Kansas City barbecue is that it's cooked at a low temperature and for a long period of time. So as they say, low and slow. And if you look at the old-time barbecue pits in this town, they were all built out of brick or stone. And of course, this particular barbecue pit here at BB's is made out of granite stones, which are able to hold the heat. A key element to Kansas City barbecue is having a good smoky flavor to it from one of the hardwoods. The barbecue definitely has a smoky taste to it. What you hope when you pull out a brisket and you slice into it is that you're going to have a pink ring all the way around the outside of that brisket. In fact, you should be able to pull off a brisket, take a slice of it, and eat it right off of the pit and have as great a flavor as you could want without ever putting a drop of barbecue sauce on it. Kansas City's famous for burnt ends. And so what we do is we take those briskets after they've cooked 10, 12, 14 hours, cut the big end off, which is where the burnt ends come from, and then we put the burnt end piece, the big piece, back on the pit and cook it for another 2 or 3 hours. And then we cut it up into small chunks, and that's what comes out onto your plate. Everybody that comes to Kansas City, what do they want to do? They want to eat barbecue. We're famous for our barbecue. We're famous for the blues.
Kansas City Blues was an orchestral expression of the blues, featuring great blues shouters like Big Joe Turner shouting the blues, accompanied by a jazz band, Kansas City saxophone sound. So there's this whole tradition of blues saxophone too. Charlie Parker, everything he played was based on the blues. You had to be able to play the blues in Kansas City. Kansas City blues and Kansas City jazz have always been intertwined. Talk about Kansas City jazz in the early days is really Kansas City blues. The first recordings were done by Benny Moten in the early 1920s with Ada Brown singing Evil Mama Blues. That's the first Kansas City blues. And the blues has always formed a foundation for Kansas City jazz. If you look at the great recordings that came out of Kansas City jazz, you got Jumpin' the Blues with Jay McShann, Blue and Sentimental with Count Basie, and most of what Charlie Parker played was based upon the blues. You can always hear the blues in Kansas City.
Kansas City blues is very unique in the fact that it marries jazz improvisation with the format of the blues. Count Basie, Jay McShann, Benny Moten, those guys were blues players, but they also knew how to fashion a riff on top of that blues progression that they were playing. Kansas City, it was a meeting place, because all the guys came up from Texas and Oklahoma. Some of the guys came in from further down and deep in the South, and it was just a big melting pot. And everybody spoke that same language of the blues being a straight and true form, but they were able to kick it into another gear because they could improvise off the riff.
They came here on the Katy, the railroad. They came by rail because the roads weren't very good in those days. And since the Katy fed into Kansas City, all the musicians from Oklahoma and Texas came here because there was work here. During the Great Depression, the city itself was wide open. Mary Lou Williams estimated there were 50 clubs between 12th and 18th Street that featured live music. The clubs were stretched from the riverfront all the way what they used to call out in the county, out past 75th Street. There were hundreds of clubs in Kansas City. And all that was fostered by a corrupt political machine headed by Tom Pendergast. There was lots of opportunities for employment in Kansas City for musicians, so musicians flocked here. And you had a union, Local 627, the Colored Musicians Union, and so that membership of the union afforded these musicians the same opportunities and the same pay level as their white counterparts. And since they were union, they could play also at the Playmore Ballroom, the Altorion Ballroom, Fairyland Park, Wynwood Beach, and they played there all summer long, so they had secure engagements and the protection of the union. So Kansas City was a haven for musicians from all over the country. Kansas City was a railroad hub. So if you were going to go east, west, north, south, you went through Kansas City, at Union Station.
I was born a blues musician. It's just a matter of finding a guitar and making the sound that I remember hearing my daddy make. At the age of 6, a year before I started school, I was doing that. So that's how I became a blues musician. I wanted to do something with the strings, make them, bend them to my will, make them do what I wanted to do. Make that kind of sound. Kansas City blues is unique by the way the musicians play. And it's by how they accept other musicians into the group that they perform in. It's unique that way. It's a sound where you almost create it as you go along. Like if you want to play a certain solo, you play that solo backwards and forward, any way you want it. Blues is a feeling that you have, but expression is what it should call. It should be called expression. That's what you're doing. You're expressing your feeling, whether you're happy, sad.
I became a blues musician originally through my parents. We grew up, my brothers and I grew up with a strong foundation in the blues. I started playing blues, my first paying gig, I was 12 years old with my parents, and then I started fronting my own band when I was 16. I knew that music was going to be you know, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and I knew that blues and roots music was probably going to be where I was going to stay.
There is nothing like being up on stage playing blues with people who are perfectly in sync with you. There's no joy like that. It's an incredible, incredible feeling. You almost leave your body sometimes, and it's almost impossible to put into words. But there is a great, great joy that you get from that.
There is a very unique style of blues emerging from Kansas City now. Samantha Fish, Danielle Nicole, Amanda Fish, Levittown, and all these other up-and-coming bands. They're rooted in the tradition, yet they are coming out with a fresh style of blues that has a particular Kansas City stamp. Well, it's electric, it's music you can dance to, it's music you can pat your foot to. It is rooted in the tradition, yet they make it their own with original compositions, stellar musicianship. One of the fascinating things is that how many young artists are coming out of Kansas City and how they're touring Europe, Japan, all across the country, playing festivals, playing the blues cruise. They're really breaking out, and it's really gratifying to see that being passed on.
You know, when I was 13, 14, going to the jams, there was a handful of kids that were my age that were playing. You know, like it was me, Brody Buster, and like Matt Ward. You know, it was so few kids that were in the music. But now, I mean, they have a youth category in the IBC. You know, now there are so many young musicians, and they're taking it seriously. They're coming out of the woodwork, just throwing it down at 12 years old. You know, and it's like these kids, they want it. And they're hungry for it, and that hunger and that desire is going to be what perpetuates the blues, because that's what the blues is. It's musically your soul emoting, basically. You know, it's raw, it's pure, you can't fake it, and it's all about feeling and experience. You know, a really cool thing about the Kansas City music scene is there is a real strong camaraderie between musicians, especially showing support at other people's shows, or, you know, when there's a festival, the band comes out early to hear all the bands play, and you know, there's a lot of jamming that happens as a result of musicians that don't normally get to play together. And I think, you know, not every city has that, and that's something that is really special about Kansas City. It's the passion of the musicians and just the sense of family that the city has, and I think being one of those crossroads of the country really laid a foundation for that.
And if you have someone come in from out of town, they're really in awe of the number of clubs that feature blues music here in Kansas City compared with the towns that they come from. And so this town sometimes, I think, takes it for granted that we have so many blues clubs, so many jazz clubs, and such a terrific live music scene.
I think compared to other cities of comparable size, Kansas City has a flourishing jazz and blues scene. And it's because of the clubs. It really survives because of people like Frank Hicks, people like Lindsay Shannon, the club owners, that will put up the money to hire bands. Bands don't have to pay to play here like they do in other cities. They will hire bands on the weekends and during the week and provide work for musicians, because if musicians don't have any work, they will move on.
Well, if you're going to hear the blues, you need to eat barbecue. It goes together. If you don't eat barbecue, you need some blues.
The first barbecue king in Kansas City was Henry Perry. He was right there in the district at 19th and Vine, had an open air stand. And you could smell the smoke from Henry Perry's barbecue, as well as you could hear the great jazz bands that played at Lincoln Hall. So the two are intermingled. The Old Kentucky Barbecue at 19th and Vine featured Walter Brown, who later recorded Confessin' the Blues for Jay McShann. Lucille's Paradise, which was upstairs next to the Call on 18th Street, featured Buster Smith and Charlie Parker. And they served barbecue. So all these barbecue joints had a stomped down pianist in there, so that fostered the whole blues tradition. So barbecue and the blues have always gone together here in Kansas City.
When I'm on the road, it doesn't matter where I am. It doesn't matter what venue it is, if it's a festival, if it's a club, whatever. If they serve barbecue, they want to know what we think because we're from Kansas City. And it's hard because, you know, Kansas City barbecue is great, and it's kind of like it's blues, and I think they really do go hand in hand in this way, is that Kansas City doesn't have one type of barbecue. It's just such a melting pot of different styles of how to make it. So we've got a lot of great different tastes in barbecues, but anywhere you go, there's going to be music playing. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be blues.
BB's Lawnside Barbecue is a classic roadhouse. There were a lot of juke joints out there because you didn't have to abide by closing rules after the cleanup during the 40s. And BB's very much in that tradition out there by itself on 85th Street. Just, you notice BB's is south of 85th Street. There's a good reason, because at some point they moved city limits to 85th Street. So if you were just outside the city limits, you didn't have to close. It's an unincorporated area. BB's have been a keeper of the flame for so many years, both providing work for musicians and also great barbecue.
BB's is like going home. Everybody there welcome me each time I go. They're all there welcome me, and it's a friendly atmosphere. And they got pictures on the wall of fallen comrades. And it's just a warm atmosphere at BB's, give you a feeling of, okay, I'm gonna have some barbecue. Definitely gonna listen to some blues.
So many people have found the blues at BB's, you know, and they're like, you know, they come up and say, I didn't know I liked the blues until I heard you. Or, you know, I love BB's because you know, it doesn't matter what night of the week you go there, they have good blues playing. It's always been, oh, you want barbecue? Go to BB's Lawnside. You know, they got a great band playing too.
One of the things that I often say when people are enjoying themselves, and I can see them all smiling and eating and tapping their toes and wiggling their bodies in their seats, I just say, we be smoking. When you drive by BB's Lawnside Barbecue, your car automatically turns into the parking lot, because you see the smoke comes up out of the chimney of the smoker and it wafts out onto the street and gets into the car, and it just automatically brings cars and people into the parking lot as they're driving down 85th Street. You know, the rings that you look at when you cut a tree down to tell how old it is, if you cut BB's in half, we would have all those smoke rings that show the 10,000 days of BB's Lawnside Barbecue, serving up smoking blues and smoking barbecue.
Here's one called Kansas City's Burning. Well, there's a big thick cloud hanging over this town, but let me hip your people to what's really going down. From BB's to Bryant's, from LC's to Gates, we got the best Q going in the United States. Kansas City burning. Yes, the capital of barbecue. Don't you know that we're smoking everything from rich rhythm and blues.
The sights, sounds, feel, taste, and aromas of a city leave an impression. All our senses are stimulated when experiencing Kansas City barbecue and blues. As Lindsay says, the smoke from the barbecue pit flavors our blues, and the music gives feeling to the barbecue. It's an experience Kansas Cityans treasure, and visitors relish, remember, and take home with them.
In G. Off the 5, a 2, a 1, 2, 3. Well, there's a big, thick cloud hanging over this town, but let me put you hip to what's really going down. From BB's to Bryant's, from LC's to Gates, we got the best Q going in the United States. Kansas City's burning. It's the capital of barbecue. Man, you know that we're smoking everything from ribs to rhythm and blues. But there's a different kind of flame burning late into the night, and our hometown musicians keep it cooking up just right. If you dig Bobby Watson's alto or Milledge Gilbert's strat, the players here in town got the recipe down pat. Kansas City's burning. It's the capital of barbecue.